As many of you know, I have started wearing eyeglasses. Not because I want to. I don't really like wearing eyeglasses, to be quite honest with you. I don't have to wear them all of the time, but I was struggling because I have these progressive lenses. And so I was struggling with my reality, my new reality, as I was looking at going down the stairs and as I was reading or watching the television or doing whatever other things that I typically do throughout the day. And so I went back to the place where I got the glasses, and they said, well, what you need to do is you need to wear your glasses constantly for a little while to allow your brain and to allow your mind to just adjust and adapt to this new reality. And then eventually you won't even be thinking about the glasses, and you'll be able to kind of walk through life just fine. And so I started doing that. They said it should take about 2 weeks. I'm in week 3. I'm still struggling with what this feels like and what this looks like. And so that's why I've been wearing them constantly, just to allow that adjustment. That's kind of what Lent is. Lent is a lot like putting on a new pair of glasses. It's a lot like looking at the world through a new lens, through a lens that causes us to take another look at ourselves, a lens that causes us to take a look at our relationships with each other, a lens that invites us to take a look at our relationship with God and our relationship with Jesus. And that throughout these 6 weeks of Lent, the 7 weeks, we start to change and adapt. And our way of looking at the world is changed and transformed because we're looking at it anew. We're looking at it in fresh ways. That is really the joy, the blessing, the gift of this Lenten season. And so as we have been walking through together the last 7 words that Jesus spoke on the cross, I find myself, as I'm reflecting and as I'm studying the scriptures, of trying to look at it from that new lens, trying to look at it in that new and different way. And so as I was approaching the scripture for today, I began to wonder that if I were brave enough to be a part of that wandering band of men and women that constituted Jesus' initial followers, I probably never would have expected to find Jesus hanging on the cross. And yet, if I imagine myself at the scene of the crime as an eyewitness to the most famous of executions on that hillside just outside of Jerusalem, those first 3 words of Jesus seem to be exactly what I would expect of him. And just to review that first prayer of forgiveness on behalf of his executioners, I would expect to hear that, because then I would be reminded of his words and of his teaching when he said, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And then he offers a promise of forgiveness, a promise of assurance to the criminal that is hanging next to him. And in that moment, I would be reminded of his words where he would say, "For I came not to call the righteous, but the sinner." And then providing for his mother, for whom he would no longer be able to care for, and hearing those words, "Honor your father and your mother." But as we follow along this story, these lines of Jesus' last 7 words, things turn a corner with the 4th word that Pastor Stephanie shared with us last week. And after a few hours of brutal torture, Jesus was finally exposed and deserted. He had been judged, and he cries out in that loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then the situation continues to deteriorate as we pick up the story in the Gospel of John, the 19th chapter, verses 28 through 29. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Jesus says, "I am thirsty." This is the one who said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." He is thirsty. The one who asked the Samaritan woman at the well to get him a drink of water. And then after she does so, he goes on to tell her that he could give her that which would cause her to never be thirsty again. Is thirsty. The one who said, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will not be hungry. And the one who believes in me will never be thirsty. Is thirsty. On the last day of the festival of the booths, Jesus stood up and he said in a loud voice, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. This same man is the man that is hanging on the cross. And he says, I am thirsty. The one who is the light of the world is fading fast. The one who is a good shepherd has handed over his mother to one of his sheep. The one who said, I am the resurrection and I am the life, is dying. It is a sad and difficult time. And we shouldn't be surprised then in the midst of this moment of Jesus' life that he is thirsty. He probably hasn't had anything to drink since breaking the bread and drinking the cup with his disciples in the upper room for the Last Supper. And since then, he has prayed in the garden. He's been arrested in the night. He's been questioned by Annas and Caiaphas and Pilate. He's been flogged. He's been made to carry his own cross to Golgotha. Of course, he's thirsty. Of course, he's parched. When was the last time that you have really been thirsty? I would imagine that none of us here, for the most part, have ever been in that place of deep, deep thirst. I'm thirsty right now just talking about it. I might want to come on over and get this leftover Capri Sun. See, that's how easy it is for us. We can just run and get a Capri Sun, or we can go to the water fountain. Most of us carry a water bottle with us. Do we really know what it's like to be deeply, deeply thirsty? About 20 years ago, I was on a youth mission trip to Crow Creek Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And while we were there, we were invited to take part in a sweat lodge ceremony. Has anybody here ever been part of a sweat lodge ceremony? There is only a couple people that have. All right, that's at least a little bit more than what we had in first service. So it's not often that we get that experience. And so we were invited to partake and to take part in this particular experience. And if you've never been a part of a sweat lodge, or if you've never seen a sweat lodge in and of itself is a very unique kind of structure. The skeleton of the structure is actually made by willow branches that are bent to be able to create together, as they come together, the shape of a dome. And the skeleton is then covered with rugs and furs and blankets in order to create this blackout kind of darkness. And they really strive to make sure that there's not any light, there's not a ray of light that gets into that particular space. Well, inside of the lodge, in the center, there is an area where large heated rocks are placed. And before the ceremony begins, these rocks are heated up in a really big and large fire. And once everyone is inside, the rocks are brought in to be able to heat up that space. Additional rocks are brought in if it's needed to be able to keep the temperature up. It usually is around 102 degrees, somewhere around there. And our ceremony leader, this doesn't always happen, but our ceremony leader would also put some water on top of the rocks to create some steam. And I had gone into this particular lodge. Our turn was with about 6 other youth and adults. And one of those adults was a 90-year-old lady that was a youth sponsor for one of the other groups that was there. Now, for those of you that know me well, you know that I don't like the heat. I don't like summer. I love the cooler weathers. I love the cooler seasons. I don't like baking in anything, okay? And so the joy of this whole experience was that they told us that if it got too hot, that we could ask to be let out in the midst of the ceremony, and they would let us out. And so I had that to go on, but I'm also a very competitive person. And so I told myself, if this 90-year-old lady is going to stay in there that long, I'm going to stay in there as long as she's going to be in there, right? And so we crawled into the lodge. The lodge is actually built really low to the ground, and as we sat around those heated stones, we were in that total blackout darkness. listening only to the voice of our ceremony leader as he invited us into this sacred space. He invited us into this place to be able to be quiet and to pray. And at first, I was able to focus on those prayers as the temperature began to rise. At first, I was able to just stay in that focused place and focus on God, focus on myself, listen to myself, try to listen for God. But eventually, as the temperature rose, I couldn't focus on those things anymore because I was starting to focus on my physical place. I was starting to focus on the sweat that was stinging my eyes. I was starting to focus on my parched mouth because all I could think about was getting a nice cold drink. And then eventually my prayer moved, not from the prayers of myself or for the people that I know and love, but my prayer actually, I confess, moved to, Lord, please guide this 90-year-old lady out of this lodge. Because I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. But she didn't. The Lord didn't lead her out. And eventually, I was so hot, I was so focused on the things I wasn't supposed to be focused on, I gave up. I said, I need to get out. And so they opened up the entrance flap, and as they opened up the entrance flap, the light kind of shined in, and as I was crawling out, I looked back, and there she was, just sitting there, quiet, eyes closed, drenched in sweat, peaceful as can be. And I realized I never stood a chance at all. And when you know it, as I was out there, once I got out, and I was only out there probably no more than 2 minutes, when the ceremony ended inside and everybody else was left coming out. I was so focused on quenching my own thirst that I missed out on seeing that experience through to the end. If that's not a common experience of our own human condition, I don't know what is. See, because in our story today, Jesus, he doesn't have a choice. He has to see this experience through to the end. And in the midst of this hell that he is in, he says, I am thirsty. Jesus just wanted something to wet his parched lips, his gritty mouth, his dry throat, and that's fairly obvious. But after the agony he has been enduring for hours now, Jesus is suffering this bitter dehydration and this blistering thirst. Just please, he says, something wet. And in the midst of the agony of his thirst, there's a sponge full of sour wine, which is really wine that's gone bad. It's vinegar, as Pastor Stephanie shared with our kids. Can you smell that? Can you taste what that would taste like? The sharp scent, the bracing taste must have stung Jesus, but the wetness offered in that moment was just a moment of relief for him. Jesus' agonizing experience, it reminds us that God knows the enormity of human pain. Even the pain that we experience in illness, the pain that we experience in woundedness and brokenness and heartbreak, because God became human flesh and he felt that pain deeply on the cross. And in the midst of that deep and desperate pain, Jesus expresses a very simple reality when he says, I am thirsty. But what if Jesus wasn't just speaking to his physical experience, but that he was also speaking to his spiritual one? Bishop Willimon suggests in his deep anguish, in his thirsting, they offered him a sponge with vinegar on a stick. But Jesus was thirsty for more than water. Jesus had a deep, blessed thirst that God's will be done on earth as in heaven, that God's righteousness might be fulfilled to the brim, a holy thirst that can only be assuaged by lifting up the cup of salvation and drinking it to the dregs. That maybe Jesus thirsts less for himself and more for us. Maybe Jesus' words reveal to us that God thirsts for our righteousness, for us to be in that right relationship with Him, that God thirsts for our good, for our healing, for our wholeness. See, in the Scriptures and throughout the Scriptures, that word thirst is usually meaning more than just thirsting for water. It means to yearn. It means to long for. It means to be desperate with desire. So as Jesus longs for us, as He longs for us to be in that right relationship, to accept and embrace that grace and that love that God offers, what would it look like then for us to long for Him in that way? To long for Him and His work in this world, to thirst for His righteousness. Now, friends, I'm not talking about the hallmark version of our faith, where we say that we love without doing the hard work of love. Where we say we sacrifice by giving out of our time and our talent and our treasure, the ones that we have left over. Where we speak about the issues of justice without actually doing the work, the systemic work of justice. I'm talking about the cross-marked version of our faith. The one that invites us to carry our cross. The one that invites us to die to ourselves, to thirst for the world, not only as it is, but also as God created it to be. A faith that invites us to not give up doing what is good, even when it feels that we can no longer stand the heat. G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Any person who preaches real love is bound to beget hate. Real love has always ended in bloodshed." Those aren't words we want to hear. But maybe those are words that we need to hear as we listen to Jesus' words on the cross. There is sacrifice if we are to be Jesus' followers. There is a deep thirst for a better world that only God can quench. There is a desire to crawl into those dark places and to offer the gift of living water. Mother Teresa had a sign that was placed above the doors of the chapels in all of her missions. And that sign read, "I thirst, I quench." I thirst, I quench. Mother Teresa said that she desired to satiate the thirst of Jesus on the cross for the love of souls. In other words, when we offer a cup of cold water to those in need, we are giving water to Jesus on the cross. We are quenching His thirst. When we serve others in Jesus' name, when we are helping to quench human need, we are serving Jesus Himself. So perhaps as He yearns for an end to His own suffering, Jesus seeks to remind those who will follow Him to serve, to quench the thirst of the needy for His sake. So in these three simple words, Jesus speaks from the cross, and He tells us we have the opportunity every single day to care for Him in the way in which we care for one another. Yet we walk by people every day who are thirsty. We walk by people every day who are hungry and who are sick, who are naked, who are in prison, who are helpless, who are hopeless. Have we missed seeing Christ in them? Have we forgotten that when what we do unto the least of these, we do unto Him? I'm not casting any judgments here because I do this myself. Actually, I'm pretty good at it. What's more, I can even be in the middle of oftentimes doing the God stuff, right? And I can still miss this message. I can be in my car with the radio blaring and the windows shaking because of the Christian music that I've got on, praising God and thanking God and all those wonderful things. And I'm driving as I'm doing that right by the homeless people that are on the corner. And I'm riding right by the hospital. And I'm riding right by the prison and the battered women's shelter and the soup kitchen. Or sometimes it might be that I'm just so focused on the tasks that I have to be able to do that I miss the pain of a coworker. I miss the cries of a youth. I miss the pain of someone who's grieving. We all can miss these things. But that's why this message from the cross is so beautiful. Because there's no condemnation. There's no judgment. There's no shaking of the head in disappointment and disgust. That in the beauty of that last moment and out of the depths of his own physical suffering, when all his work on earth has been done, there comes this one simple plea from the cross. I am thirsty. And it comes to us today from the least of these. It comes to us from the family on government assistance, from the victims of abuse, from the oppressed, from the immigrant, from the victims of war and famine and poverty, from the victims of human trafficking. It comes to us from those who are suffering silently with depression, wounded marriages, broken trust, grief. And Jesus says softly to us this morning, don't forget. All those that I have created are all around you. And they're a part of my family, and because they're a part of my family, they are a part of your family. And there are people out there who need you. And from the mouth of the man who spent his life and his ministry as a servant comes one final plea for us to love and to serve others. And he says, and he whispers to us this morning, don't forget. There are people out there who need you. Your time, your skill, your friendship, your ear, your presence, your love. And for those of you who hunger and thirst for righteousness yourselves, don't give up, he says. With me, you can stand the heat. Keep doing the messy work of love. Because I am still thirsty. Amen.